Have you ever stopped to think about the profound role black people play in the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah? What if I told you that the role of black individuals in these sacred texts isn't just a footnote or something that can be skimmed over? Rather, it's deeply woven into the fabric of these spiritual narratives in ways that have influenced not only religious history, but also the very foundations of culture, justice, and equality across the world. You see, when we open these holy books, we may often read the stories, the parables, the teachings, but how often do we consider who was actually part of these stories and what their presence meant? In many ways, these texts reflect a diverse and interconnected world where people of different races, backgrounds, and cultures crossed paths in profound ways. And black people in particular have played a critical role, not just as bystanders, but as central figures, agents of change, and models of faith, wisdom, and courage. In the Bible, we find ancient African kingdoms like Egypt and Cush, and individuals like Moses, who was raised in the heart of Egypt, a powerful African civilization. We also encounter the story of the Ethiopian eunuch, one of the first non-Jews to embrace Christianity in the New Testament, whose encounter with the Apostle Philip changed the course of history. Then, in the Quran, we are introduced to a story of a man whose faith and resilience broke down centuries of racism and social divisions. Bilal ibn Rabah, the first muezzin of Islam, a man born into slavery, yet elevated to a position of honor because of his unwavering belief in the one true God. His life is a testament to the power of faith, the rejection of racism, and the equality of all people before God. And let's not forget the Torah, which gives us the rich history of the Jewish people, where figures like Moses, born in Egypt, an African empire, walk alongside ancient African cultures, reflecting both the shared history and the unique paths of these great civilizations. The connection between the children of Israel and their African neighbors was not one of isolation, but one of collaboration, conflict, and profound influence. But here's the thing. This is often overlooked in many modern interpretations of Scripture. In the past, the representation of black people in these religious texts has sometimes been ignored or misinterpreted. This can sometimes lead to a skewed perception of what these texts say about race, identity, and the role of black people in God's plan. So, why does this matter? Why should we care about these ancient stories and the roles that black people played in them? Well, understanding these narratives is essential, not just for understanding the history of religious thought, but also for challenging the biases that have shaped how we view race today. It's about reclaiming the narrative, recognizing that black people have been part of the sacred story from the very beginning, and their contributions, sacrifices, and wisdom are integral to the message of faith, love, and unity that these scriptures convey. Throughout this video, we're going to dive deep into these texts, exploring the stories, the individuals, and the historical context that shapes our understanding of black people in the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah. We'll examine the roles they played, the significance of their presence, and how these ancient texts speak to issues of race, equality, and justice even today. I invite you to join me on this journey, not just to learn something new, but to see how these stories from thousands of years ago still speak powerfully to the struggles, triumphs, and lessons we face in the world today. Let's open our hearts and minds to the deep, interconnected history that binds us all, regardless of race, as we explore what role black people truly play in these sacred texts. When we look at the historical context of black people in ancient religious narratives, we begin to see the deep and interconnected relationships between Africa and the ancient world of Israel. The Bible, the Quran, and the Torah are not isolated in their narratives. Rather, they are a reflection of the vast cultural exchanges that took place across regions and peoples, including Africa. Ancient Israel was not a place separated from Africa. In fact, it was inextricably linked to the African continent, both geographically and historically. Let's start by considering the geography. Ancient Israel was nestled between powerful African civilizations like Egypt, Kush, and Nubia. These kingdoms were not just neighbors, they were intertwined with Israel's development in many ways. Egypt, in particular, was one of the most influential civilizations in the ancient world. It was home to remarkable advancements in architecture, mathematics, and philosophy, and its influence can be seen throughout the Bible. The Egyptian Empire had a profound impact on the religious and cultural life of the Israelites. In fact, the story of Moses, one of the central figures in the Bible, is deeply rooted in Egyptian history. Moses, raised as an Egyptian prince, was familiar with the grandeur of the Egyptian court before his exile and eventual return to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. But Egypt was not the only African nation that played a pivotal role in the development of these religious stories. The Kingdom of Kush, often associated with modern-day Ethiopia, is another African civilization mentioned in the Bible. Kushites are frequently referenced throughout the Old Testament, and they are portrayed as both powerful and wise people. The relationship between Israel and Kush was one of both conflict and alliance, reflecting the complex dynamics between neighboring nations. The presence of Kushites in biblical stories is significant because it challenges the assumption that the Bible only focuses on a narrow, homogeneous group of people. It shows that African nations were involved in shaping the narrative of Israel's history and theology. In fact, the influence of African nations on Israel is far-reaching. Ancient Israel, like all civilizations, was influenced by its neighbors, and these influences were not just limited to politics or economics. They extended into religion, culture, and even the way people viewed themselves and their God. The story of the Exodus, one of the most pivotal moments in the Bible, takes place in Egypt, and it is a story of liberation from African rule. The Israelites' journey from Egypt to the Promised Land is a story of freedom and identity, one that is closely intertwined with the history of Africa. It's essential to understand that the Bible's narrative is not just the story of one isolated people, but of a broader human experience that includes multiple nations, including African ones. The connections between Israel and Africa were not only geographical, but also cultural, spiritual, and social. The African presence in the Bible is not incidental. It is a fundamental part of the story of Israel's formation, identity, and faith. As we transition into looking at the role of Black people specifically in the Bible, we see that their presence is not just mentioned in passing. It is integral to the biblical story. In fact, many of the most significant figures in the Bible were either directly African or had strong ties to African civilizations. These figures are not just side characters in the biblical narrative. They are active participants who shape the course of history and faith. One of the earliest and most significant mentions of Black people in the Bible comes through the descendants of Noah. After the Great Flood, Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, are said to have fathered the nations of the world. According to the Bible, Ham's descendants founded several African nations, including Egypt, Kush, modern-day Ethiopia, and Libya. The Bible's emphasis on the descendants of Ham is significant because it ties Black people directly to the very origins of the world's nations. This genealogical link establishes African people as foundational to the biblical narrative, not as later additions, but as integral members of God's creation. As we delve deeper into the Old Testament, we encounter several notable figures of African descent. One of the most prominent is Moses, the great leader who liberated the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. Moses' connection to Egypt is profound, as he was raised in the Pharaoh's household after being adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. His story is a tale of identity, transformation, and liberation. But it also highlights the cultural exchange between Egypt and Israel. Moses was not only influenced by Egyptian civilization, but also played a critical role in shaping the identity of the Israelites. His connection to Africa, particularly Egypt, is crucial to understanding the broader context of his life and mission. Another significant African figure in the Bible is the Queen of Sheba, who visited King Solomon to test his wisdom. The Queen of Sheba, often thought to be from the region of modern-day Ethiopia or Sudan, is an important figure, not only because of her role in the biblical narrative, but also because of the cultural and economic exchange that took place during her visit. The story of the Queen of Sheba is a testament to the deep historical connections between Africa and Israel, highlighting the shared wisdom, knowledge, and spirituality between these two great civilizations. In addition to these figures, the Bible also mentions the people of Cush in several key stories. One of the most famous references is in the book of Numbers, where Moses' wife is described as a Cushite woman. This brief mention is significant because it highlights the cultural and racial diversity of the Israelite community. It also challenges the notion that the Israelites were a racially homogeneous group, emphasizing that they were connected to and influenced by the broader African world. The presence of Cushites in the biblical narrative challenges us to rethink the role of race and identity in Scripture, reminding us that the Bible does not exist in a vacuum, but reflects the complex realities of the ancient world. In the New Testament, we encounter another important African figure, the Ethiopian eunuch, who is baptized by Philip in the book of Acts. This story is significant, not only because it marks one of the first recorded instances of a non-Jewish person embracing Christianity, but also because it highlights the role of African individuals in the early spread of Christianity. The Ethiopian eunuch's story is one of faith, conversion, and spiritual transformation, and it serves as a powerful reminder of the inclusive nature of God's love. These stories, along with many others, demonstrate the central role of Black people in the Bible. They were not just passive observers, but active participants in the unfolding of God's plan for humanity. Their contributions were not secondary or peripheral, but integral to the spiritual and historical narrative that defines the Bible. These figures were not simply incidental, they were central to the message of faith, redemption, and unity that the Bible conveys. In addition to these individual stories, the broader theme of African involvement in biblical history underscores the interconnectedness of the world. The Bible is not a story of one isolated people, but of a world that is deeply interconnected, where nations, cultures, and peoples, especially those of African descent, played pivotal roles in shaping the course of salvation history. The presence of Black people in the Bible is a testament to the richness and diversity of God's creation and the universal scope of His love. As we turn our attention to the Quran, we will see that the story of Black people in this sacred text is just as rich and just as significant as their role in the Bible. The Quran offers a profound perspective on race, equality, and justice, and Black individuals are central to its narrative. One of the most compelling figures in the Quran is Bilal ibn Rabah, a former African slave who became one of the most revered figures in Islam. His story is one of faith, perseverance, and triumph over adversity. And it speaks to the enduring power of spirituality to transcend the boundaries of race and social status. But Bilal is not the only African figure in the Quran. There are other references to black people, and their roles in the early Islamic world are just as important as their biblical counterparts. The Quranic teachings about race and equality challenge us to look beyond outward appearances and recognize the inherent dignity of every person, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or social status. Just as the Bible offers a rich tapestry of black figures who played pivotal roles in salvation history, the Quran too offers a vision of a world where race does not divide us, but unites us under the banner of faith. By exploring the stories of black people in the Quran, we can begin to understand the deep spiritual connections that bind all of humanity together, regardless of race. The Quran, like the Bible, offers a powerful vision of a world where all people are valued equally in the eyes of God, and where the contributions of black individuals are recognized as integral to the story of faith and redemption. In this exploration, we will uncover how these sacred texts, from the Bible to the Quran, offer a rich, diverse, and inclusive narrative that speaks to the central role of black people in the story of salvation. We will also see how these texts have influenced not only the development of religious thought, but also the social and cultural dynamics of the world. As we continue this journey, it's important to remember that the representation of black people in these texts is not just a historical fact, but a living truth that continues to shape our understanding of race, faith, and justice today. These sacred narratives are not just stories from the past. They are guiding principles that offer insight into the future, where unity, equality, and love will be the foundation of a just world. Let's dive deeper into the Quran and begin with one of the most inspiring and profound figures in Islamic history, Bilal ibn Rabah. The Quran, like the Bible, is not only a spiritual guide, but also a text that addresses the deeply human aspects of race, identity, and equality. In the Quran, we see that black people, particularly through figures like Bilal ibn Rabah, have a profound and important role in the story of Islam. But before we delve into the life of Bilal, let's take a step back and look at the overarching message the Quran conveys about race and human diversity. From the very first revelation to the Prophet Muhammad, the Quran emphasizes that all of humanity is equal in the eyes of God. In Surah 49:13, we find one of the most powerful verses on human equality. O mankind, indeed, we have created you from male and female, and made you peoples and tribes that you may know one another. Indeed, the most noble of you, in the sight of Allah, is the most righteous of you. This verse emphasizes that the differences between people, be it race, ethnicity, or social standing, are not a source of division, but rather a means of learning from one another and appreciating the diversity that God has created. The Quran, unlike many other ancient texts, rejects the idea of racial superiority and asserts that righteousness, not race, determines a person's worth. When we move into the stories of specific individuals, we find that black people play pivotal roles in the development of Islam. One of the most significant figures in the Quranic narrative is Bilal ibn Rabah. Bilal's story is a powerful example of how faith can transcend the boundaries of race and social status. Bilal was an African slave who embraced Islam in the early days of the Prophet Muhammad's mission. His conversion was not only a personal transformation, but also a social revolution. Bilal's steadfast faith in the face of extreme persecution made him one of the most revered figures in early Islam. He became the first muezzin, the person who calls Muslims to prayer, which is an honor that places him among the highest ranks in the Muslim community. Bilal's story is significant for several reasons. First, it highlights the egalitarian nature of Islam, which recognizes the worth of individuals based on their faith and character, not their social status or race. Bilal's rise from slavery to spiritual leadership is a clear demonstration of how Islam rejects the idea of racial hierarchy. His life serves as a reminder that in the eyes of Allah, all are equal, and anyone, regardless of their background, can attain greatness through piety and devotion. The Prophet Muhammad himself was deeply supportive of Bilal, and their bond is a symbol of the friendship and equality that Islam seeks to foster among all people, regardless of their race. In addition to Bilal, the Quran mentions other important African figures, particularly those associated with the Prophet Muhammad's time. For instance, the Quran speaks of the Queen of Sheba, who visited King Solomon, Sulaiman, to test his wisdom. Although the Queen of Sheba's story is not as central in the Quran as it is in the Bible, her presence is significant. The Quran acknowledges the importance of her wisdom and her relationship with Solomon, which reflects the historical connection between Africa and the Middle East. Her story represents the intersection of African and Semitic cultures and underscores the value of knowledge, humility, and mutual respect between different peoples. The presence of black people in the Quran is not confined to a few notable figures. The teachings of the Quran are universal, and they emphasize the dignity and honor of all people, regardless of race or social standing. The Quran's call for unity and equality serves as a counter to the racial divisions that have plagued humanity throughout history. Through the stories of individuals like Bilal and the references to African kingdoms such as Egypt and Sheba, the Quran reinforces the idea that race should not divide us, but rather, it is our shared humanity and devotion to God that brings us together. As we move to the Torah, we continue to see the important role that black people, specifically through their connections with African nations, played in the early history of the Jewish people. Like the Bible and the Quran, the Torah reflects a world that was not racially homogeneous, but one in which various peoples interacted, shared knowledge, and shaped each other's destinies. The Torah's portrayal of black people is crucial in understanding the broader narrative of salvation and humanity's relationship with God. The story of the Jewish people in the Torah is deeply intertwined with Africa, particularly through Egypt. The most significant African connection in the Torah is the story of Moses, who was born in Egypt, the great African empire that dominated the ancient world. Moses' life is a direct reflection of the complex relationship between Israel and Egypt, which, though at times adversarial, was also marked by cultural and theological exchanges. Moses' own connection to Egypt is a testament to the deep ties between the Israelites and African civilizations. Raised in Pharaoh's household, Moses was intimately familiar with the Egyptian way of life, its laws, and its religion. His experience in Egypt shaped his worldview and prepared him to lead the Israelites out of bondage. Moses' role in the Exodus story is central to the Torah. The Exodus is not just a physical journey from Egypt to the Promised Land. It is a spiritual journey that symbolizes liberation from oppression and the formation of a unique covenant between the Israelites and God. In this context, Egypt plays a crucial role, not only as the land of Israel's captivity, but also as a place of divine intervention and transformation. The very act of God delivering the Israelites from Egypt is a testimony to his power over all nations, including the powerful African empire of Egypt. The story of the Exodus shows that no matter how powerful a nation may be, it cannot stand in the way of God's will for his people. In addition to Moses, the Torah also references other African nations and peoples. The descendants of Ham, one of Noah's sons, are said to have founded several African nations, including Egypt, Cush, and Libya. These nations play significant roles in the Torah, not just as distant neighbors, but as nations with whom Israel had complex relationships. The Torah speaks of Egypt's role in both the oppression of the Israelites and their eventual liberation. Egypt is also the place where Joseph, one of the 12 tribes of Israel, rose to power as a trusted advisor to Pharaoh. Joseph's story highlights the interconnectedness of Israel and Egypt and the ways in which the African nation played a pivotal role in the survival of the Israelite people during a time of famine. The story of Moses' wife, Zipporah, who is described as a Cushite woman in the book of Numbers, is another important reference to black people in the Torah. While this brief mention may seem insignificant at first, it speaks to the cultural diversity of the Israelite community. Moses' marriage to a Cushite woman serves as a reminder that the Israelites were not an isolated people, but part of a larger world that included African nations. This passage challenges the notion that the Israelites were racially homogeneous and highlights the importance of cross-cultural relationships in the biblical narrative. Furthermore, the role of Egypt in the Exodus narrative and the mention of Cushite peoples in the Torah remind us that the history of the Jewish people is not one of isolation, but one that is deeply connected to the African continent. The Torah's portrayal of Egypt, Cush, and other African nations reinforces the idea that Israel's history is part of a larger human story, one in which black people played a central role. These African nations are not just peripheral to the story of Israel. They are integral to the story of salvation and the unfolding of God's plan for His people. As we reflect on these biblical and Quranic stories, we see that black people were not just bystanders in the spiritual narrative. They were active participants who shaped the course of history and salvation. Their roles in these sacred texts speak to the larger themes of unity, equality, and the shared human experience. The story of faith, redemption, and liberation in the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah is not just about one people, but about the entire human race, united by our shared humanity and our common connection to God. These sacred texts, from the Bible to the Quran and the Torah, remind us that black people have always been central to the spiritual narrative. Their presence, contributions, and faith serve as a testament to the universal message of these scriptures, that all people, regardless of race or background, are loved by God and have a vital role to play in His divine plan. As we continue to explore the teachings of these texts, let us remember that the story of salvation is not just about one group of people, but about all of humanity, bound together by the love of God. When we examine the commonalities between the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah regarding the role of black people, we begin to understand that, despite their differences in narrative style and religious emphasis, these three sacred texts offer a shared vision of human dignity and unity. They speak to the power of faith in breaking down barriers, of love transcending race, and of God's calling to all people to come together in worship and service. Across these traditions, black people are not only represented, but are integral to the unfolding story of salvation, wisdom, and divine purpose. One of the most significant shared figures across all three texts is the Queen of Sheba. In both the Bible and the Quran, she is depicted as a wise and powerful African monarch who sought out the wisdom of Solomon, the king of Israel. In the Bible, her visit to Solomon is described as an act of deep intellectual curiosity, as she tested Solomon's wisdom with hard questions. And in the Quran, she is portrayed as a ruler who acknowledges the divine wisdom of Solomon. The Queen of Sheba's story in both traditions emphasizes the importance of knowledge, humility, and the recognition of truth, qualities that transcend race, nationality, and gender. Her role in both texts serves as a powerful reminder of the spiritual and intellectual contributions of African people, highlighting that wisdom is not limited to any one nation or group, but is something that can be found across cultures, including Africa. Similarly, the figure of Bilal ibn Rabah is another common thread that ties together the biblical, Quranic, and Torah narratives of black people. While Bilal is most often associated with the Quran and early Islamic history, his story is also part of the larger religious tradition that includes the Bible. Bilal's journey from a slave to the first muezzin of Islam is a story of transformation, faith, and perseverance. It is a reminder that black people in both the Quran and the Bible are not defined by their social status, race, or history of oppression, but by their faith and their relationship with God. Bilal's story, in both Islamic and broader Abrahamic contexts, speaks to the power of spiritual equality and the rejection of racial divisions, encouraging all people, regardless of their background, to seek closeness to God through faith, love, and service. Both the Bible and the Quran, along with the Torah, convey a message of universal brotherhood, emphasizing that the color of one's skin, one's ethnic origins, or one's social position are irrelevant in the eyes of God. The Quran's verse about the equality of all people before God, where the most noble among us are those who are most righteous, echoes the biblical and Torah teachings about love, humility, and divine justice. The shared themes of redemption, forgiveness, and spiritual equality that resonate through these texts transcend any divisions based on race. Through figures like Bilal and the Queen of Sheba, both the Quran and the Bible challenge us to rethink our human-made divisions and call us to recognize the inherent value in all people, regardless of race or status. Even when examining the descendants of Noah in the Bible and the Torah, particularly the descendants of Ham, who are often identified with African peoples, there is an undeniable message of inclusion. The Bible, which often emphasizes the importance of Israel's connection to other nations, underscores the reality that all people, including those of African descent, are part of God's plan. The Quran echoes this by highlighting that the diversity of people, tribes, nations, and colors was ordained by God to foster understanding and respect for one another. These common threads, woven into the fabric of all three sacred texts, create a profound and unified message that is both deeply spiritual and profoundly human. The roles of black people in these texts are not incidental or marginal. They are essential to the narratives of wisdom, faith, and salvation. In fact, the inclusion of these individuals in such central roles shows that God's message is universal, and that His love and calling extend beyond all racial, cultural, and national boundaries. It is not race or ethnicity that determines a person's worth in the eyes of God, but their faith, their deeds, and their hearts. As we turn to the theological significance and modern implications of these roles, we begin to see that the story of black people in the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah is more than just historical or cultural. It's about a larger, divine message of equality, justice, and love. Understanding these roles not only enriches our spiritual lives, but also offers important lessons for addressing contemporary issues of race and inequality. In both the Bible and the Quran, the message of salvation is not confined to a particular race or ethnicity, but is offered to all people. The central theme of these scriptures is that all humans, regardless of their background, are created by God and are loved by Him equally. This message has profound implications for how we view race and identity in the modern world. The Bible, the Quran, and the Torah all call us to reject racism, prejudice, and the division of humanity based on superficial distinctions like skin color. These sacred texts offer a vision of a world where all people are treated with dignity, respect, and love. This theological message speaks directly to the injustices that Black people have faced throughout history, from slavery and colonialism to modern-day racism. The stories of figures like Moses, the Queen of Sheba, Bilal, and others serve as powerful examples of how faith can overcome oppression and how people from all walks of life can contribute to the larger story of humanity's redemption. These figures, through their courage, wisdom, and faith, challenge us to live according to a higher standard of justice, one that transcends the racial divisions that have caused so much harm in our world. But the implications go beyond just a moral lesson. These stories of Black people in the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah also call for action. They remind us that we must actively work to dismantle the systems of racism, inequality, and injustice that still persist today. The spiritual message of equality in these texts is not a passive call, but one that demands active participation in the work of building a just and inclusive world. We are called, through the example of these figures, to fight for justice, to advocate for the marginalized, and to recognize the inherent value and dignity of every person, regardless of their race. At a time when racial tensions continue to affect societies around the world, the theological significance of these sacred texts becomes even more important. The Bible, the Quran, and the Torah offer a powerful vision of a world where race does not divide us, but where we are united by our common humanity and our shared faith in a loving, just God. This message is more than just religious doctrine. It is a call to action, a call to change, and a call to live out the teachings of these scriptures in our everyday lives. In the modern world, where racial inequality remains a pervasive issue, the stories of Black people in the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah serve as both a reminder and a challenge. They remind us of the importance of spiritual equality and justice, and they challenge us to confront the systems of oppression that still exist in our societies. These sacred texts offer a vision of a world where people of all races and backgrounds are valued and treated with dignity, a world where justice and equality reign supreme. Ultimately, the theological message of these texts, whether we read them as Jews, Christians, or Muslims, is one of unity, equality, and justice. The roles of Black people in the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah are not just historical curiosities, but profound theological statements. They teach us that the love of God knows no racial boundaries, that salvation is available to all people, and that we are all called to live together in peace, love, and respect for one another. As we conclude this journey through the sacred texts, let us take with us the message of inclusion and equality that resonates through the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah. Let us remember that Black people, and indeed all people, have an integral role in God's plan for humanity. And let us live out this truth in our daily lives, working to create a world where all people, regardless of race or background, are treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. It is through this vision of equality and justice that we will bring the teachings of these sacred texts to life and make the world a better place for all. As we bring this exploration to a close, it's important to reflect on everything we've uncovered about the role of Black people in the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah. We've examined how these sacred texts present Black individuals not as outsiders, but as integral parts of the divine narrative, each playing a crucial role in the unfolding story of salvation, wisdom, and human unity. The presence of these figures, from Moses to Bilal to the Queen of Sheba, is a testimony to God's inclusive love and his plan to unite all of humanity, regardless of race, background, or status. We've also seen how these stories transcend the boundaries of time and place. While the historical contexts in which these sacred texts were written may seem distant, the messages they carry remain profoundly relevant today. The principles of justice, equality, and love that are embedded in these narratives are timeless truths that continue to speak to the struggles and challenges we face in our world, particularly when it comes to issues of race, identity, and social justice. The Bible, the Quran, and the Torah all teach us that God's love is universal, that his call to faith and righteousness is extended to every person, no matter their race or ethnicity. These texts encourage us to see beyond outward appearances and recognize the inherent dignity of every individual as a child of God. They remind us that race is not a barrier to God's love or to his divine plan. Instead, they offer a vision of a world where people from all backgrounds are united in their shared faith and devotion to a higher power. But the message doesn't stop at theological reflection. These sacred texts also offer a challenge to us, the readers and believers. They call us to act in ways that reflect the equality, justice, and love that God desires for all of humanity. The stories of black people in the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah show us that we are all called to participate in God's mission of healing, reconciliation, and unity. These stories are not just about the past, they are a call to action in the present. In today's world, where racial divisions still persist, where inequality and injustice continue to affect black communities and many others, the message of these sacred texts is more important than ever. The stories of Moses, the Queen of Sheba, Bilal, and others offer a vision of a world where race does not divide us, but unites us in our shared humanity and our shared faith. These stories remind us that the work of justice, equality, and love is ongoing, and it requires all of us to be part of the solution. As we reflect on the role of black people in these sacred texts, we also need to acknowledge the historical and cultural contexts in which these stories were told. For many centuries, the contributions of black people were either ignored or misrepresented, both within religious traditions and in broader society. This oversight has often led to a skewed understanding of race and religion, one that overlooks the significant contributions of black individuals to the spiritual, intellectual, and cultural development of the world. But as we've seen in this exploration, the truth is that black people have always played a vital role in the history of faith. They have been leaders, prophets, rulers, and faithful servants, each contributing to the unfolding story of God's redemptive plan. Their stories are not side notes or afterthoughts. They are central to the message of these sacred texts. So, what can we take away from this journey? First, we can appreciate the profound spiritual significance of these narratives. The Bible, the Quran, and the Torah all present a vision of humanity that transcends race and ethnicity. They remind us that we are all part of one human family, called to love and serve one another in the name of God. Second, we can recognize that the role of black people in these texts is not just historical, it is present and ongoing. The spiritual and moral lessons they offer are just as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago. The stories of black figures in these texts remind us of the power of faith, the importance of justice, and the need for unity in the face of division. Finally, we can be inspired to live out these lessons in our own lives. The challenge of these sacred texts is not just to admire these figures from the past, but to emulate their courage, their wisdom, and their commitment to justice and righteousness. Whether we are working to break down racial divisions, advocating for the marginalized, or striving to live lives of humility and faith, the stories of Black people in the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah offer a powerful guide for how we can live out God's will in today's world. In conclusion, the roles of Black people in the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah are not merely historical curiosities or minor footnotes in the grand narrative of salvation. They are essential to understanding the full scope of God's plan for humanity. These stories challenge us to see beyond the barriers of race and ethnicity and to recognize the shared humanity that binds us all together. They call us to live lives of justice, love, and unity, just as the figures in these sacred texts did. And they inspire us to work toward a world where every person, regardless of race, is treated with dignity and respect, a world where God's love and justice reign supreme. As we move forward, let's remember that the message of these texts is not just a call to theological reflection, but a call to action. It's a call to embrace the principles of equality, justice, and love in our own lives, and to work toward a world where all people are treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. The legacy of Black people in these sacred texts is not just a story of the past. It is a living, breathing testament to the power of faith and the vision of a more just and unified world. Let's carry that legacy forward and continue to build a world that reflects the divine love and equality that these texts so profoundly teach.